So the Dogon name is linguistically related to Dagon, the fish god of the Philistines. They have these creatures by the name of Nomos, who begin to be fish-like creatures who of creation. When you look into the word nomos in Greek, this is law, specifically referring to the laws of Moses. When you begin to look at Abraham, he began to have Emah, or fear or terror, fall up on him concerning what would happen in Egypt. In Hebrew, when you begin to look at Nomos, the root will bring you to nomad, which Kenites and Rechabites are. Rechabites are water drinkers. The Dogon Nomos means to make one drink. When we begin to look at the Dogon goddess, the mother is Emah, Yah. When you look at Amma, Yah. When you begin to look at Emah in Hebrew, this is mother, Yah. When we begin to look at the fiery law that was given unto Moses, this word Ishdath, ESH, is going to be fiery. This is going to be related to Ish. We've talked about this yesterday. That Dath means law, specifically talking about marriage. So this can go back into the Amma Yah of the Nomos, the marriage between Asherah and Yahweh, due to the fact that the Ishdath, or the fiery law, linguistically possibly said Asherah first, seen as if the D would be replaced by the R. And in Hebrew, this is linguistically possible. When we also begin to spell nomos in Hebrew, we can replace the samek with the tav, due to the fact that the samek, the sheen, and the tav are linguistically inexchangeable with one another. And when we begin to add the tav instead of the samek or the sheen, we get the word speeches, which would bring us to the Tower of Babel, when the earth was on one accord and the earth was divided by languages. And these languages, they were given over to Emah, Yah, or Ashtoreth and Yahweh, to begin to take them in as a people group. This is how you begin to prove that the Dogon from Mali are historically accurate. The biblical narrative takes place in Mali, Chad, the Libya, Niger, the Niger Congo, Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Western Asia, Western Europe, so on and so forth. When we begin to look at the Sirius B, it begins to talk about the Dogon being able to use the signs to tell prophecy, and so on and so forth. We see this with Nimrod, who is the erector of the Tower of Babel. In the time of Abraham, we also see Abraham clearly using the stars and things of that nature to be able to travel in the same regions that the Dogon began to speak of. When we begin to look at the word nomos in Hebrew, before we begin to add the samek or the sheen or the tab to it, it gives us nome, Nome. A nome in ancient Egypt are districts or areas. And when you begin to look at the Dogon, they have the Hogon people, who were looked at the first man and the first woman, and they end up being the priests who live autonomously away from the people groups. They are not allowed to sleep with women, but they can have a young maiden come in and serve them. We see this tradition continue to be lived out over in Ethiopia and India on today. We will also begin to see the Levitical priest in the Bible, whom did not live scattered amongst the Israelites as Jacob, declared before his death and when he cursed them. And then under the Nomos of Moses, he allowed the Levites to begin to live in nomes or in districts. So when you begin to look into ancient Egypt, they live in nomes and they live in districts, a total of 22, I believe, in Upper Egypt and 20 in Lower Egypt, constituting for the number 42. When we begin to look at the number 42 in gematria, it definitely adds up to Negro. Rest in peace, Jackie Robertson. When we begin to look at the number 42 in the Bible, this begins to look into the 42-month reign of the Antichrist. The number 42 also brings us between the generations from Abraham to Yeshua. Y'all see how essential it is not to dismiss what we call theories and look into them for exactly what they are. When we begin to look at the root of that fiery law with Ashad, we begin to see Chad, which is Shadaim, which is going to be breasted or heel. Most importantly, this is going to go back to not what we call demons, but what are simply spirits that are outside of the Hebraic custom. They do not belong to us. So even at its root, it begins to say that Chad gave the law of Moses. And it's not a stretch. You can begin to read up on this for sure. So when we begin to look at the Shadaim, we will see them spoken about in an enormous way, specifically in the book of Tobit, with their leader by the name of Ashamadoth. And it's crazy because you see, he has the Alf, he has the Sheen, he also has the Mem, but he has the Dilet, which would still give you the ASD that you begin to see in Ashdod, the fiery law. It's important to know that the Ebionites, or the poor, the Jamesonian Nazarenes, the followers of Yahushua, they began to teach that the creator of the world went by the name Yal-Daboth. When we begin to look at the name Yal-Daboth, I am going to go into this very broken down one day. When you look at the both, B-O-T-H, this goes back into the total voodoo of creation. When we begin to look at the Yalda, this is Yada or Yadeo, and this is he who exists. It's not a stretch. When we begin to look, and you guys can look this up, they begin to say in the Epistle of Barnabas, which is definitely found at the 9th chapter and the 3rd verse, that they were deceived in the wilderness by an evil angel. And when we begin to see that in the wilderness, what came to them? Something, a prickly, fiery bush. When I began to say that fire is an unclean spirit, when we began to look at Moses and Elijah calling fire down from heaven, it's very essential to know that in the book of Matthew, the 17th chapter, when James and John began to volunteer to call fire down from heaven, Yahushua stated to them, you know not what spirit you speak in. And then when you continue to read in the book of Matthew, the 17th chapter, you will see the boy tossing himself in the fire and in the water. The water spirits go back to the Nommos, and the fire goes back to Asherah, or the fiery law, as well as Zoroastrianism. So when you begin to look at Ashmadi and the Shadaim, it goes back to Zoroastrianism. And they indeed state that the law of Moses was Zoroastrianism influence and origin. And even when we begin to look at the loan words, it is Persian loan words as well as Akkadian loan words. The Pharisees and the scribes made the Torah in vain, according to Jeremiah 8:8. And this is how we begin to linguistically as well as historically prove that these people were greatly influenced by water spirits and by fire spirits The worship of the moon, which caused the boy to be lunatic, originated in Mount Sinai. Sin is moon worship. Line upon line.